A woman who once preached to 22,000 people across 2 campuses now can't fill 100 chairs on a Sunday morning. Paula White didn't lose her megachurch overnight. It didn't collapse in a single scandal or a single headline. It happened the way most institutional collapses happen, one controversy at a time, one betrayed congregation at a time, until the woman who was once compared to the biggest names in American televangelism was preaching to rows of empty seats. This is the timeline. Every scandal, in order, and what it cost her. In 1991, Paula White and her then-husband Randy White founded Without Walls International Church in Tampa, Florida. It grew fast. By 1999, while still holding services under an outdoor tent, the church was already reporting around 5,000 weekly attendees and thousands more served through outreach ministries. By 2004, that number had exploded to roughly 20,000 members, making Without Walls one of the largest churches in the country, reportedly the 7th largest in the United States. Money followed the growth. An audit later showed the church took in about $150 million between 2004 and 2006 alone. Paula and Randy White weren't just pastors anymore. They were a brand. Success on that scale drew scrutiny. In 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley, then the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, launched an investigation into the finances of 6 prominent televangelist ministries, including Without Walls. Grassley's committee wanted to know how these organizations were spending their money, and specifically, how much their leaders were paying themselves. What came out was hard to spin. Paula and Randy White were pulling in a combined salary in the range of $5 million a year from a nonprofit ministry. Of the 6 ministries investigated, only 2, Joyce Meyer Ministries and Benny Hinn's World Healing Center, were found to have fully cooperated and implemented financial reforms. Without Walls was not one of them. Grassley's final report landed in 2011. By then, the church was already unraveling for a separate reason. In 2007, Paula and Randy White divorced. For a ministry built entirely around the image of a unified pastoral couple, that was an earthquake. Congregants who had followed Pastor Paula and Pastor Randy as a package now had to reconcile the collapse of the marriage at the center of their church's identity. Randy initially stepped back, citing health reasons, and on July 12, 2009, Paula White became sole senior pastor of Without Walls. She didn't just inherit the pulpit, she inherited every financial decision that had been made under both their names. The math caught up fast. In January 2011, Paula White took on a second title, becoming senior pastor of the church's second campus, Without Walls Central Church in Lakeland, Florida, meaning she was now solely responsible for both locations of a ministry already buried in debt. It didn't last. In August 2011, the Lakeland campus had its electricity shut off after the church failed to pay more than $50,000 in utility bills. The church had accumulated roughly $29 million in debt it could not service. Assets were sold. The ministry filed for bankruptcy. By June 2012, Randy White had returned to lead the Tampa campus on his own, picking up the pieces of a church that, just a few years earlier, had been one of the largest in America. The empire that took 2 decades to build had come apart in about 5 years. Financial collapse was unfolding. A personal scandal hit at the same time. In the summer of 2010, the National Enquirer published photos of Paula White and televangelist Benny Hinn holding hands as they left a hotel in Rome. Hinn was still legally married to his wife Suzanne at the time, though she had filed for divorce earlier that year. Both White and Hinn denied any romantic relationship. White called the allegations categorically false, insisting the two were never alone and were in the constant company of staff and other associates. Hinn issued his own denial, calling the claims lies. Then, in February 2011, Hinn's book publisher, Strang Communications, filed a $250,000 lawsuit against him, alleging that Hinn had violated the morality clause in his book contract. According to the lawsuit, Hinn had privately acknowledged to the publisher, back in August 2010, his inappropriate relationship with White. The public denial and the private admission didn't match. For a congregation already reeling from a divorce and a Senate investigation, watching their pastor's name attached to an infidelity scandal involving one of the most famous faith healers in the world was one more reason to walk away. In 2011, with Without Walls in bankruptcy, Paula White took over as senior pastor of New Destiny Christian Center in Apopka, Florida. She was stepping into a church already dealing with its own tragedy. Its founder, Zachary Timms, had died the previous year of a cocaine and heroin overdose. At the time White took over, New Destiny had roughly 8,000 members. It should have been a fresh start. It wasn't. By 2017, membership had collapsed to fewer than 500, a loss of more than 90% in 6 years. In 2019, White handed the pulpit to her son, Bradley Knight, then serving as associate pastor, and the church was rebranded City of Destiny. White remained involved as a teaching and overseeing pastor, rather than a full-time leader. The rebrand didn't stop the bleeding. The church would go on to change its name again, becoming Story Life Church, with the sanctuary continuing to empty out. Recent footage shows congregants now seated around tables rather than in rows of chairs, with the band moved down to ground level because the stage built for thousands is too large for the room's remaining crowd. 2 churches, 2 collapses, same pastor. In early 2015, Paula White married her third husband, Jonathan Cain, keyboardist of the rock band Journey, also his third marriage. Months later, the two preached together at White's church on the subject of marital intimacy. Cain told the congregation, with teenagers reportedly present, that wives should educate themselves on their husband's sensual needs, and that if necessary, they should watch porn together to learn how. Paula White laughed on camera as her husband made the comments, then attempted to walk it back, saying they weren't advocating for anyone to get addicted to porn, just to educate themselves. The clip resurfaced repeatedly in the years that followed, including in 2025 when it was recirculated amid criticism of her role in the Trump administration's faith office. White's proximity to Donald Trump, she says they met when he caught one of her sermons on television at Mar-a-Lago, turned her into a national and international figure. She prayed at his 2017 inauguration and later served as a special advisor in the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. That visibility didn't calm the controversies. It multiplied them. In January 2020, video surfaced of White praying during a sermon for all satanic pregnancies to miscarry right now. The clip went viral, drawing condemnation from clergy across denominations, including Jesuit priest James Martin, who said no pregnancy should ever be called satanic and that no one should pray for a miscarriage. White said her words were taken out of context for political gain and that she was referencing a Bible verse about spiritual warfare, not literal pregnancies. The explanation didn't stop the clip from becoming one of the most mocked moments of her public career. Then, in November 2020, days after the presidential election, White delivered a prayer, captured on video and viewed millions of times, in which she spoke in tongues and called for angelic reinforcement from Africa and South America to overturn the election results in Trump's favor. The prayer was widely mocked, including by African commentators and journalists who called out the racial framing of African and South American angels being dispatched to fix an American election.
For angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now. For angels have even been dispatched from Africa right now. Africa right now. Africa right now. From Africa right now. They're coming here. They're coming here.
In May 2023, speaking at the Universal Peace Federation's Peace Summit in South Korea, White told the audience she had personally worked with Nelson Mandela to help abolish apartheid in South Africa, describing advocacy work she said began after she built an AIDS home in Pretoria in the 1980s. The Nelson Mandela Foundation, which maintains the official archive of Mandela's life and work, said it had no record of any involvement by White whatsoever. "We have searched our holdings and do not find anything on Paula White," the foundation's head of archive and research told the Christian Post. White's office did not respond to requests to substantiate the claim. The story spread across Africa, including South Africa itself, turning into widespread public mockery of a claim nobody but White could verify. Twice in as many years, White appeared as a keynote speaker at events organized by the Unification Church, the religious movement founded by Sun Myung Moon, and widely referred to, including by former members, as the Moonies. In December 2020, and again in December 2021, White shared the stage with Hak Ja Han Moon, the movement's current leader, publicly calling her a jewel from God and praising her as a spiritual leader, doing the work of uniting the world's religions. Critics inside the evangelical world reacted with alarm. The Unification Church teaches doctrine fundamentally incompatible with historic Christianity, including beliefs about its founder's messianic role that most Christian denominations regard as heretical. For a woman who identifies as an evangelical pastor and a spiritual advisor to a sitting U.S. president, publicly praising the leadership of a group most Christians consider a cult wasn't a minor misstep, it was a direct contradiction of the faith she claimed to represent. In December 2022, Journey guitarist Neil Schon sent a cease and desist letter to Paula White-Cain, alleging that her name had improperly appeared as an authorized signatory on the band's business bank accounts tied to an agreement that was only supposed to involve Schon and White's husband, Jonathan Cain, personally. Financial records reportedly showed White-Cain's signature on Journey-related banking documents dating back to at least July 2020. White-Cain's attorney called the claim nonsensical, explaining that she had signed the documents only as co-trustee of her husband's personal trust, a structure her lawyer said was recommended by Schon's own legal team. Schon's camp rejected that explanation and continued to push for her removal from the accounts. The dispute became one more headline, tying White's name to a financial controversy, this time playing out inside one of the most public band breakups in rock music. More recently, White drew criticism for telling audiences that Christians should not attempt to convert Jewish people to Christianity, a position that put her at odds with mainstream evangelical theology on evangelism, and drew accusations that she was prioritizing political alliances over her own stated faith. Then, in February 2026, at her Unleashed conference in Apopka, White told her congregation she wanted $100,000 to come in that night, breaking it down out loud into denominations of $10,000 and $1,000 gifts, and instructing attendees to make checks payable directly to Paula White Ministries. She framed the ask as a sacrificial seed for a fellow minister's cause, telling the room, "This isn't for me," even as she directed the money to her own organization's account. Critics pointed to the moment as a distilled example of prosperity gospel fundraising, a pastor leveraging a room's spiritual anxiety to extract 5- and 6-figure checks in real time. Add it up, and the pattern is impossible to miss. A Senate finance investigation, a messy, public divorce, a $29 million bankruptcy, an alleged affair with one of the most famous names in televangelism, a second congregation that lost 90% of its members on her watch, a viral prayer for satanic miscarriages, a racially charged prayer for African angels to overturn a U.S. election, an unverifiable claim about working with Nelson Mandela, repeated public praise for a movement most Christians consider a cult, a public financial dispute with a rock legend, a theology that tells Christians not to evangelize, and a $100,000 stage pitch dressed up as generosity. None of these scandals ended her career on their own, but stacked one after another, over nearly 2 decades, they did something a single controversy never could. They eroded the trust of the very people who once filled 22,000 seats. Today, the church she built from a tent in Tampa survives as a congregation of roughly 80 people sitting around tables instead of rows, with a band playing on the floor because the stage was built for a crowd that isn't coming back. There is nothing wrong with a small church. Plenty of healthy congregations operate at that size by choice. But this one didn't choose to be small. It got there one scandal at a time. Paula White went from pastoring one of the largest churches in America to preaching in a room with more empty chairs than filled ones. It wasn't one scandal that did it. It was all of them, together, over 2 decades, and a pattern that shows no sign of stopping even now. If you've been following our coverage of prosperity gospel accountability, this story should look familiar. We'll keep tracking it. Thanks for watching. This has been Anointed TV.